Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to another video. We're about to watch an interview with an old man friend of mine. I met him about like 6 to 8 months ago, um, and he's retired now. He used to work in the mental health industry, and so we're going to be chatting about why is mental health such a problem now in today's day and age. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, share, right? Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in another video. Peace.
But the thing is that she used to chase us out of the kitchen.
Okay.
I mean, not that we cared; we just wanted to eat the food. But the point is, she didn't want us. It's you're in my way. Get out of here. So, if she was a resource for learning how to cook, I didn't get the benefit of it.
Okay. All right.
Are we on?
We can.
Oh, we're on. Oh, hi.
Right. So yeah, we can just like jump right into it, really.
Okay, sure.
I don't know what information you want to disclose, right? But you do have experience in the industry of mental health.
Correct.
Right.
About 27 years. I work with the homeless population as well as the chronically mentally ill.
Okay. Was there public services intertwined with that in your occupation? Because like homeless people, how are you engaging with the homeless?
Well, as far as public services,
Yeah.
I mean,
the government would help.
How interesting that you even raised that right off the bat, because the shelter that I worked in was actually experimental for the times. It was a place that did not just rely on I forget the old expression, but 3 hots and a cot, I think it was, where years ago to work with homeless persons, they used to just have like church missions. And it would just be a place to let you sleep, and then in the morning you left or whatever. We had a facility that had deployed staff from all different agencies within the county. Okay, so we would have alcohol and drug services. We would have family services. We had a very active community. So if one of our residents needed work-related clothing, we would have vouchers. So it was a real comprehensive attempt to solve the problem of homelessness. And this was back in the late 80s. And believe it or not, we were actually so ahead of our time that we were featured on Good Morning America. And we were written up in the Wall Street Journal, and there was a magazine, I forget the name of it. But we were pretty hot back then. And it was a wonderful experience to work with folks and actually make a real substantive change in their situation. So we had case management. We had religious services, if that's what your bag was. So many nice little perks. Holidays were a great time for everyone.
Okay.
Trust me.
So they came and went, and the government would bring these people for you, or was it an institutional thing? Or
well, the standard stay was 30 days, but if you were working on your program, you had a case manager. And if you were doing what you were supposed to do, we could extend you. So it's
like a psych ward thingy.
No, it wasn't a psych ward, no.
Oh,
but
okay.
We would extend their stays, and we would try to help see them through. Like we would fill out applications for housing. We would connect those who needed to mental health services or alcohol and drug services. So we were like a one-stop shopping place. And that was relatively unheard of back then in the late 80s.
Okay.
Now, I don't really want to get into where it was.
No,
I
that's
could
fine.
certainly talk about that. But,
Yeah.
So that's where I first started. All right.
Okay.
And then I moved on to mental health supportive housing, a crisis care facility, which was a 24-hour inpatient facility. So most of our clients were what they called step downs from hospitals. So we were a transitional piece to get them from the hospital setting, which was obviously highly structured and supervised, to a lower level of supervision and then back to the community, whether they went to their own homes, their own supported apartment programs, or back to a homeless shelter if they were homeless.
Okay.
And we provided comprehensive psychiatric services, just focusing on that little transitional piece. You have a crisis, there's a problem in the moment, and we're trying to get you over the hump. So we didn't have long-term relationships per se with our clients. However, we had so many repeat visits that you could say that, yeah, we knew them because they'd been in our facility many times, because the chronically mentally ill often struggle with periods of crises, and you want to try to normalize their conditions as well as you can. You're not going to conquer their mental illness. Those are long-term problems, and many of our folks would have to struggle with that, some even for the rest of their lives.
Wow.
I could go on and on, but I mean, there's certainly a recovery movement which became very prominent. And I've always believed that we always have to have hope. So if someone has a diagnosed mental illness, I don't really like to tell them, oh, it's just something you'll have to deal with for the rest of your life. Because I really would like to believe that if we all come up with maybe the perfect thing to say or the perfect plan of action, that one day folks with mental illness could recover. So I'm definitely a believer in the whole recovery concept.
Most definitely, and I do too. Because when you say, mental illness, it's like, well, there has to be some origin where that thought pattern,
Right.
starts with, whatever neurotic way they can conceptualize something, and then they're leaning to that.
Sure.
Like
absolutely.
a before and after results, when
Right.
they get a thought and then they conclude this way, and then they
Right.
act that way, responding to the thought.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
You know.
Well, so we're talking about the origins of mental illness, right? So we
Right.
have
There has to be some way to reverse that.
well, that's
Allegedly.
a complicated
Right.
issue, but let me start with the basics. Okay, so we have the biopsychosocial model of we call it the etiology or the causes of mental illness, right? So biological would be what? Like a predisposition. There's something about your body chemistry. It could be heredity based. So if you have relatives who have struggled with mental illness,
Right.
they have done studies that suggest that you might have a high predisposition towards a mental illness. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be activated to become manifest in you. But we definitely try to gather the history of a person, and that would be an indicator that maybe there is a biological component to what we're dealing with. Okay. So go ahead.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But my perception of that is they're nurtured into that way because their mom and dad, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
If the mom was nurtured that way, then the son or the daughter would be nurtured that way.
Right. So
well.
then that would get us into the other components, okay, which would be the psychological and the social. Okay. So the psychological could be what are the patterns of interactions between family members, the levels of dysfunction, perhaps there's abuse, sort of like external factors. Okay, so the biological is something that's encased within your
right.
body chemistry. It's already there, let's say. The other categories would be coming from an external impetus. Okay, again, how you are nurtured. That's exactly what we're talking about. And also the social, which would be your life outside your family unit. All right. So I could speak forever because on the social component, because I think we have an explosion of factors that are going on before our very eyes in our society that are encouraging either the furtherance of mental illness, or if people are just attaching themselves so fiercely to what's going on in the larger world, it could be that it causes them to react in such a way that's fairly dysfunctional. And I could go into that for a long time if you'd like to. But do you understand the paradigm here that we're looking at biological, psychological, and social?
Right.
And I think that's consistent with what you're talking about nurturing at. Excuse me, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you want to touch on the social?
Yeah, because basically I wanted to come down here and chat about how
Sure.
why is mental health such a trending topic
Yeah.
in culture these days.
Well, you could always argue that
Whether it's good or bad, but
well,
mostly
it's definitely bad, right? If
Yeah.
it's mental illness, I mean, we want to try to have people feel like, at least be able to report that they're coping well with the world that they live in, right?
Right.
But as far as anything that's exploding on the scene, I mean, I don't know. It could be that we've always had, nothing's changed, but that we are spotlighting various dysfunctions in society. Because, I mean, years ago, you could say a lot of family secrets were going on, a lot of kids were being abused. And today we hope that we're putting into play a lot of ways to detect that a child at school, let's say, who might be undergoing trauma from the family or within the family, that we can spot them. We've got better techniques of spotting a child who's having difficulty. Whereas years ago, a lot of that stuff was passed over, and they didn't have the tools to recognize that a child was being victimized at home or that a child just wasn't doing well, other than maybe in general terms. So is there an explosion? I mean, personally, I think the area that we are exploding in terms of mental illness in society is not the biological, not the psychological, but the societal. We have
Okay.
so many things going on out there that children, if you look at what children are being exposed to, to me, it's beyond their ability to comprehend. We have a tremendous amount of age inappropriate stimuli that comes at them, whether it's on the computer that they have access to. It's no longer the era. I mean, just throw out things. This is all anecdotal. I'll throw stuff out.
Yeah.
Like, for example, with our Playboy magazines, it was all undercover. It was all, ooh. But pornography,
Right.
you can put all your filters on television, but children have seen pornography. It's very readily available to them. And it is not healthy for them to be exposed to that at an early age. I don't think any psychologist would say, yeah, it's benign. It's not going to hurt them.
Right.
You have political situations here that are just staggering. You have government corruption that is over the top that we're learning about.
Right.
We have the inability of folks like you to navigate through the world easily like we did. Your ability to purchase a house is unbelievable. You used to just, what is it, 8 years ago, $89,000 annual income would qualify you for perhaps a mortgage or whatever. Now they say it's like 136 because the prices of the houses have just gone crazy. You have the leftist agenda to dominate academia from the cradle on up. You have obviously the transgender movement,
Yeah.
which is fine as long as you're over 18. If you're an adult, you can do whatever you want. But to expose children, I may not agree. That's not my point. That's never been my business.
No, but you're right.
And I have worked with transgender folks. I have actually worked with them on a professional basis. And I believe that they should be treated with the utmost respect, like every client that I worked with. But when you start talking about doing stuff to young children, and we know what we're talking about here, they are under the age of consent. There's a reason why we look for informed consent, because children are not able to make these life-shattering decisions or life-changing decisions. And yet, there are folks out there who are in positions of power who have signed on to it. And I mean, I could go on and on about what we're seeing in society. And I think it's contributing to neuroses at the very least.
Right.
And I think at the most extreme, mental illness. I mean, I just don't see how, if you can't navigate in the world, if you can't make a living and achieve what they call the American dream. And so many of you guys, you're Generation Z or X or whatever.
Right. Technically, I'm Z.
I mean, you guys are just, the thing is, I cannot apologize to you because I've always been fairly conservative. I've always thought about, well, you're spending this money. What about the generations to come?
Right.
What about them? How do you justify a $36 trillion deficit? All debts are paid.
Right.
Not deficit, but debt.
No,
Because the
you're right.
deficit
You're
is
right,
$2
though.
trillion a year, but the debt is $36 trillion.
Yeah.
And there is not one debt that has ever gone unpaid. It's just a matter of who you're passing the debt on to.
Mm.
So you, I mean, you don't even have a guarantee that you're going to have Social Security. I mean,
Right.
I'm collecting mine for a few months and I'm as happy as a pig and you know what. But I know that could run out. And they talk about bankruptcy by 2032 and then they've taken it down to 2028. And if anything, even my benefits could be modified, but at least I'm getting something. Whereas when you're 65 or whatever, there's no real guarantee that you're going to get anything from the government.
Right.
So how are you going to navigate your old age? And I also have a pension. So if more and more companies are not offering pensions, that's another source of income, which we considered basically we took for granted. So many people got pensions back in the day. And you guys are not going to get it.
So a lack of security.
Absolutely. And do you think that insecurity doesn't feed into our mental our sense of wellness?
Right. To come back full circle.
So that's why I'm saying, in my opinion, the social part of the causations of mental illness is exploding. It's like a big, gigantic bubble. Whereas it's possible you could argue that the biological and the psychological, it may be even improving on some of those levels because, you know, we're encouraging people to talk about their problems.
Right.
So that's a good
That's
thing.
the first step.
So
right?
yeah. So there's a lot of, so what I'm saying is on those two categories, there's a lot of positive trends that we could point to that would possibly ameliorate. That means, make more manageable, lessen the effects of the negative effects of, that's what the word means.
Got it.
And so, you know, I think there are some factors that we can actually point to that are fairly positive. But that social thing, I'm sorry, I think maybe it's just my own personal beliefs and as a political person but also as someone whose career was psychiatrically based and whatever, I think it's got to affect people in a negative way.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. So I just want to keep.
Oh, and let me throw something else in on the social thing.
Yeah.
You know, I see my country. We've always been very welcoming. My family came through Ellis
That's the
Island.
American
All of my
concept,
relatives came through Ellis Island on both sides of the family.
Dude.
And I have no issue with people coming into this country. The problem is that the way they've been coming in the last 6 years or so, think about the impact on the lower socioeconomic Americans in terms of getting services, occupationally speaking. They're being squeezed because their wages are being suppressed because there's just so many people who are looking for low income jobs.
Right.
And
The supply, I guess.
absolutely.
So outsourcing.
It's not about outsourcing. You know, it's about illegal immigration. That's what I'm talking about. It is so out of control, or it has been so out of control, that poor people are the ones who suffer the most because it impacts them the most. If you're wealthy, that's fine. You want to come in if I need a pool boy or a maid or a babysitter, fine. That's not going to affect me at all from an economic standpoint. But it's going to affect a lot of poor people in this country because their wages are going to be suppressed because there's just so many people who are going to be fighting for that little piece of the pie occupationally. So that's another social factor. You know, come in, but come in legally. And if it's a matter of expanding the number of people that we accept, I'm for it. I have no problem. I see so many people who I have a feeling are illegals, and they couldn't be nicer. You know, the lady with her children, you just want to embrace them. But that's not the way to do it. That's all I'm saying.
Right. No, I completely understand that. But at the same time, it's like ironic because they're looking for the American dream. They're looking
I don't
for
blame them for that.
their liberty.
I
You
don't
know?
blame them for that.
Yeah.
It's, you can't. I don't blame any. Obviously, the terrorists who come out. Yeah, you blame them. But I don't
Double-edged
blame.
sword.
I don't blame the poor person who sees the Statue of Liberty, the beacon of freedom and life. I don't blame them at all. I blame the people that we are putting in charge, who are supposed to provide for our security. The government, okay, the politicians, certain politicians, they have acted so irresponsibly. They're showing total disregard for the American citizens by allowing them to come, the hordes of people to come over here. And history is not, we didn't have hordes of people. Remember, Ellis Island was still controlled. It was still, immigration in the United States has been a very controlled issue for many years, up until what they've done in the past 8 years.
Mm.
So anyway, but that's a little bit, again, but the thing is, don't be afraid to meld what's going on socially to how it may impact the development of a mental illness.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. So security, and then allegedly, right, for legal purposes, the politically, they're enabling a way for people to have the lower class people, have a harder way of finding resources.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when I used to do assessments, I want to know about psychosocial stressors. That's part of my assessment. Where is this person coming from? Sometimes if you worked on the daily stress that they face, suddenly this situational depression often goes away. Are we talking about something that's really ingrained within this person, his identity, her identity? Or is it something that if you tinker with what's going on in their lives, guess what? The cloud lifts.
So it's a perception.
Well, the way we look at the world is
An
a perception.
interpretation of
Yes. But do you understand what I'm saying by psychosocial stressors? When we're talking about, it's like the global view of the client who's sitting before you. Okay? You've got categories that you're going to ask them about. How long have you been experiencing this? What does it feel like? You say you're feeling depressed. Tell me what that's like for you. How do you experience that? And you're trying to get into the world of the person who's presenting right before you. Okay? So you really do you want to try to cover all bases, because the big picture allows you to then weigh the different components that are part of that big picture. But if you just say, if the guy comes in and says, I've just been having employment issues and that's why I'm depressed, and you leave it at that, you may find that it really wasn't the employment, but actually the relationship that he had with his wife. It could be something else. It could also be that this guy's been having difficulty since he was a child and it predated any employment issue. He may have a long-standing challenge in terms of his mental wellness.
Okay.
So you try to cover the whole picture. Look at the whole picture.
Right. And when you were talking about whole pictures, you also mentioned identity.
Now, when you say identity, what do you mean?
Well, you were talking about symptomatic things stemming from their setting, right? Politics, and then the other one beforehand, just brain farted.
Well, no, you didn't. No, identity. Well, let me introduce another component here.
But then what about identity? What about people who don't have a sense of identity, or they regress? They're regressing to other identities, kind of like schizophrenia.
Okay,
something. Who knows?
Okay,
personality disorder.
All right. See, the word identity is a word that you have to have context for. What is it that you mean by that? Okay, because I could jump to looking at a category of mental illness like a certain personality disorder. Let's say the borderline personality disorder, where it is very much a crisis of identity. There's often there is a won't say an empty shell because I don't want to be disparaging because I worked a lot with folks who struggle with that over the years. And believe me, as a clinician, these are the people that when they came into your office, it was like, oh my goodness, you knew it was going to be a hot time. You're going to have a big challenge before you. But let's leave that chronic ailment aside for a moment. When you say identity, I'd say, well, what do you mean? Are we talking about like your identity as a citizen in your country, your state, your city, your part in something larger than you? Because, and bear me out. Many years ago, when I was growing up, because I am a late baby boomer, so when I grew up, societal structure was very important to us. We went to church. It was a big deal to make sure you went to school every day. We had neighbors who watched, and you wouldn't misbehave in front of them because guess what? A lot of times your parents would sanction them if they grabbed, I'm sorry, meaning support them if they found you doing something, grabbing you by the scruff of the neck and giving you a boot in the ass and sending you home. So we were tied to our community. So my identity was as a citizen of my hometown, my neighborhood, my school, my church. This is what sort of the glue that connected me to the outside world. It's almost like a hierarchy. I lived on 80th Street. I went to St. Ephraim's School. I lived in Bay Ridge. My city was Brooklyn. My real city was New York City. My state was New York State, and my country was the United States of America. All of that had meaning to us. We weren't drifting. I wonder how many, do we do the Pledge of Allegiance? What do we have a flag? Does a flag mean anything to us anymore? I'm hopeful that for many kids it still does, but I'm also suspicious that we've had a breakdown in that a lot. We've seen that.
Yeah.
So that's identity on one level. But like I said, if you were talking about more of a pathology in mental illness,
Right.
that syndrome
The
came to
sense of
mind.
self, right? Like
Yeah.
who I am, like maybe borderline personality, they regress to I don't even know.
No, you know, because
imaginary friend.
there's a
kind of
lot.
deal,
Well,
you
that's
know?
that's more of a psychotic disorder. But well, actually, even folks with borderline challenges can become momentarily psychotic. Although they don't. This is a little clinical, but they don't test out. They test normally on assessment tests. That's why it's a strange kind of syndrome.
So they're willing
But
to
they can
hold it
they
back.
can act in very psychotic terms, okay? So they can report psychotic material, but the core problem that they have is a challenge of identity. There's an emptiness there, okay? There's difficulty regulating emotions. They think black and white terms. So one day, I think I've discussed this with you before, I've had some of my borderline patients who have put me on a pedestal. Oh my God, you're just the best. And 5 minutes later, you are the worst of the worst. And it's like, where did this come from? That's why I would always tell young people who are getting into the field, don't fall for it. Only you know. You're the one who can understand me. Tomorrow, you'll be the only one who doesn't understand you, and they'll be filing complaints about you with the supervisors or whatever. So just play it even, okay? Take everything in with a grain of salt that you hear. Anyway, we're far afield. Go back. I'm sorry.
Well, when I was speaking on identity, like, why do you think those pathologies, even like be summoned? Like how what is the root nugget of distorting their identity to other identities, whether it's gender ideology or wanting to rename themselves, have a different persona?
Well, we all have different ways of trying to make sense of our worlds. I don't think there's one explanation for why somebody attaches themselves to a certain gender identity. Look, I don't want to minimize what it is that folks who struggle with gender identity are going through. I don't mean, and if it comes across to anybody, that's
And
not
that's
my
more of the
intention.
social
But well,
paradigm that you're
I'm
talking
kind
about.
of thinking that if you've got a syndrome, look, I'm speaking in terms of clinical, like it's a problem. If they don't think it's a problem, then I don't want to make it a problem for them. So I want to avoid that, even though I personally think that it is an issue. That whatever, it's a form of dysfunction, because I don't sign on to anything but two genders and two sexes, and that's it. That's just, sorry, I don't. And it doesn't
Right.
mean I didn't respect my clients, but I just don't. So what are they looking for? Is it possible that there's a lot of influence that's coming at them and you're in a vulnerable space? You know, a lot of young people, whatever, like they're talking about an explosion of gender identity issues in is it elementary school or middle school or whatever? It's like all of a
Right.
sudden everybody's got issues with their gender where they didn't have before. And proponents of that might say, well, that's because they didn't feel supported, so they couldn't express it, but it was always there. That's not a debate that I'm an expert in. I don't know. I'm just trying to cover all the bases and be respectful towards everybody. But I kind of personally feel that it's okay. I'll give you a good example. Many years ago, we had an explosion of diagnoses within our field of multiple personality disorder. Okay? And it had been very rare up to that point. In fact, in the 1950s, there was a famous movie with the great star Joanne Woodward, The Three Faces of Eve. And it was like, everybody was like, my God, we've never heard of this before. But it was like the person who claimed a multiple personality disorder. So we had a lot of the clinicians, and we had trainings. You go to seminars and everything, and they'd be saying, it's multiple personality disorder. And my friends and I are sitting in the back row and we're thinking, oh my God, you've just allowed a certain type of client, the borderline personality disorder folks. You've just given them license to be even less responsibility for their behaviors, because what could they always say? It was my alter. It was Bob who did. I didn't do it. Bob did it. And we're sitting there and we're thinking, oh my God, you've just expanded. It's like a multiplicity of targets that they could now engage in.
Yeah, but
And we're cooked.
they got one body though. You know what I mean?
Well, that
It's
was
like-
somebody said about a famous murder. It was a comedian.
Uh,
He said when the guy came up to the judge and said, it wasn't me, it was Joe who did it. And the judge screamed at him. He said, well, you better decide if it's Joe or Fred, because somebody's going to jail today. So this is what I'm saying. It's like an avoidance of responsibility. And we all have to be responsible for our lives. I used to tell folks who'd come in that one of the biggest things is you have to be safe. You have to ensure that everyone else around us is safe. It's a voluntary program. Okay. You are responsible for the consequences of your actions.
right.
It's not negotiable. We always used to sit there and we would tell our clients, because there's no indulgence. Because, mental illness, if you think about some of the old asylums and stuff, the old-fashioned mental institutions and stuff, a lot of the behaviors were just controlled as a last resort in restraints and stuff, and just really archaic ways of dealing with people.
Yeah.
And that's sad. We don't have that, and that's a good thing. But you don't have the license to assault people and hide behind mental illness. You are responsible. If you can't control your behaviors, then you need to be in a confined situation.
Right.
But the programs that I worked in all my life were all voluntary programs. And there's no excuse for you getting violent with people. And I must tell you, I have to tell you that I actually prosecuted somebody who punched me in the face. And he was mentally ill. And it was a little controversial at the time because my superiors were always dancing around like, well, we know, we support you in whatever you have to do. And then it's almost like they're trying to communicate to me like, well, maybe you let him go. But this was without getting into the circumstances, this guy was really, he had a chance to not do it again. And he did it. And I said to him, look, I can defend myself. I have the right to do that. He didn't care. And he took another good, I was on one of the major parkways. It was pouring down rain and sleet and everything. And this guy, I'm in the state of nature. I'm in a jungle. And all the cars that were passing by with all these
He
people.
like sucker punched you and ran away?
He punched me while I was driving the vehicle. And he caused jaw damage. I already have TMJ syndrome. So the jaw was like vibrating for months. And he punched me while I was driving. And then I stopped the car on the median and I'm talking to the staff. What do we want to do about this? So at that point, I wasn't going to do anything.
Right.
But then all of a sudden, I see him come out of the van and he was like, sir, he was like this with the most vicious face on. I said to him, so-and-so, I said, I have the right to defend myself.
Right.
And he didn't care. He came at me full force and let a flurry of punches. And whatever reason, I went and got him. I got him under the crotch and at the shoulder. And I put him gently because, we always have to be gentle. I didn't slam him. This wasn't I put him on the ground.
WWE.
And the cars were going by, civilization in all those cars, nicely perfumed ladies and gentlemen. And they're not in the state of nature. And I'm out in the jungle and I'm asking people to help me because I couldn't. He was trying to get, and he was strong.
Yeah.
I was trying to get him. Could you just do this? And one guy came out in a suit and he ruined his whole jacket. I felt so sorry for him. And he came out and he helped hold the guy down. And then when the police came, they came and they didn't just come like years ago. If you watched a movie in the 30s, the cops would come in the car. They'd get out and they wouldn't ask questions. First, they're bashing everybody and then they restore order and then they say, okay, what's the problem? These cops circled the perimeter and were doing what they needed to do to protect themselves first. And then they slowly came up and then we sorted it out. And I thought about it and I thought, I gotta prosecute this guy because I think he knew what he was doing. Mental illness or not.
It was battery. Yeah.
It certainly was. So I regret it. And I think I paid a price down the road for it, because I don't think the uppers really were in support of it, even though they say they were, but they weren't.
Ah, man.
So, whatever.
That's corporate fun, I guess.
It is what it is.
I don't know.
But I'm here and I'm still alive.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Yeah.
So it's multifaceted, right? Social,
Yes, multifaceted. That's a good way of putting it. You got it. It's not, because it's not, one size doesn't fit all.
Right.
You make your assessments of the person. Don't ever lose sight of the fact that you're dealing with an individual and you want to maintain their dignity. You want to get into as a clinician, you have to have appropriate boundaries, but you want to get into their lives. You don't want to just check boxes. You want to get to know, what am I dealing with here? What am I, and seek supervision. That's what, you have a staff meeting and you present your client and you listen, other people are listening and they're things are jumping out at them and they're helping you. Have you thought about this? What about that? That's why I love to present my case because I always went into what is this client all about? And I love to hear feedback from my peers.
But is there any like grounding of truth? Like this is a no, this is okay. You shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah. Well,
you know what
yeah.
I mean? Because what I've heard so far is like you sympathize with them.
Yeah.
To like normalize and like
yeah, but I don't support
support
criminal behavior.
Right. Right.
No. I don't. No, I mean the reality is you mean if somebody, like, for example, what would somebody reveal to me?
If someone was to tell you their symptoms, like, the thoughts they're having.
You mean like homicidal thoughts towards someone else? Or
Who knows? If they want to harm someone else, then yeah, obviously that's wrong.
Well, yeah, but it's not just wrong, but we're mandated. We have legal responsibility. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Right, but were you ever like trying to guide patients to just to like stop certain thought patterms? Like this is a no.
Right. You have to
like
say,
grounding them with the truth.
Well, you have to say, like, if somebody tells you like there's some dysfunctional behavioral pattern that they reveal themselves to you, I mean, the first question is, okay, is it getting you? I mean, is it getting you what you want in life? I mean, you're the one who's reporting that you're feeling depressed, suicidal, whatever, and then you tell me about all these dysfunctional behaviors that you engage in. We have to evaluate. I put it back on you. Is continuing in this relationship, let's say you're in a toxic relationship, are you still getting bang for your buck out of this? Maybe you need to reevaluate who you're associating with. You have the right to do that as a clinician. They make the decision, but you have to present,
Right.
a way to look at what you're doing and whether or not, like I said, whether or not you're navigating yourself through life in a way that works for you. You make that evaluation. The only thing is, illegal behavior, that's a dicey situation. If you're talking about homicidal thoughts to somebody, that crosses a line towards somebody. I mean, we are mandated to work our way through that one way or the other. And that may very well include notifying the person who's the target of that homicidal ideation. That's the law. You don't tell me I'm going to kill my neighbor and expect me to sit there and let it
Not
go.
tell the neighbor.
I mean, that's the end of me if I did it. Let's say I'm a selfish therapist and I don't care about the world. The reality is I get caught doing that.
Then it could
I'm
be
done.
association, perhaps. Who knows?
Association?
Like, what if you didn't inform them, right? Then guilt on you because you associated with not informing?
What do you mean guilt on me?
Like, you associated with the murderer, allegedly, because you did not spread news. Like, murderer says, hey, I'm going to kill X. And then you don't inform X. So then could you get charged with that?
Absolutely.
Like,
I don't know
guilty
what
by
the specific
association.
charge is, but it's in the statutes. It's in the law. When you work in this field, you are mandated to report this information so that the situation is resolved. You can't sit on it. Homicidal ideation is big time stuff.
You got to speak on it.
You've got to speak on it. Now, there are ways you can work through it. We're gonna have a meeting of the minds. Like, you want to find, there's going to be an assessment about, the seriousness and the veracity of this ideation and whatever. But one way or the other, again, there's varying degrees. Is it 100% that the person has to be, the target has to be informed? No, it's not. But you're not sitting on it. Let's put it like that. You're getting supervision from whoever is in your hierarchical structure. And we're going to sit down and we're going to come up with the plan that's the most lawful plan in this. Okay? Sometimes people say that they're going to hurt, they have homicidal thoughts to somebody, but they don't tell you the name of the person. And they're slick. They know. You don't want to go there. So you got to deal with that as well. You try to get them to reveal who that is because your goal is to keep everybody safe. And you don't have to be ashamed. I'm not pussyfooting with my client about keeping people safe. Okay? And also suicidal ideation. If somebody tells you I have a plan, I have the means, and I have the intent. Those are three critical features here. Then legally, I may have to seek a higher level of structure and support for you. And that could be an involuntary detention. So, legally, I would have the right, according to whatever our detention procedures, because the laws change. Every few years, they change them.
Have you got wind that some, definitely not in the United States, but some countries are legally allowing that in an assisted manner?
What's that?
A suicide.
Well,
They're allowing suicide.
Right, that's true. That's
in a legal setting.
Yes, no, I agree. I don't agree. I don't know if I agree. Look, I don't know. That's a complicated issue. Whether or not, I think that, look, it's controversial, but the whole idea of certain clients who constantly fall back on playing the so-called suicide card, okay? There are places, like you said, there are other countries where when they do that, the clinician tackles that head on. And it's not like in this country, it's supposed to be, oh no, that's never an option. That's our value system. Right. Okay. But if they do that in another country, the clinician is, I guess, more likely to say, okay, let's talk about that. How would you like to wrap up your earthly affairs.
Uh,
And certain mentally challenged persons, they have power over people when they play that card. So that would take away the power. You see, they couldn't do that in other countries, because a lot of times when a person says, I'm feeling suicidal, that means they don't have a healthy way of expressing their needs. So they pull that lever. It gets them attention, right? I'm going to drop,
Yeah.
I'm going to drop everything.
You think it's like a pity avenue? Right?
Pity. I'm going to look. The bottom line is, as a clinician, I'm going to drop everything, and I have to deal with that, because my overarching goal is to keep you safe.
Right.
I mean, what's the use of? We're not going to sit and talk about your problems if you're dead.
Right.
So,
Right.
so I have to address that, right? But in other countries, maybe not so, because I might say, okay, well, we have a plan for helping you get your affairs in order, if that's really what you want to do.
Yeah.
I
that's what
didn't
I'm
really
saying.
mean that. In the United States, they might say, I didn't really mean that.
But other countries are like medically allowing that.
Right. And I've heard stories where there was like a young lady within the past couple of years who was in her late 20s, and they said she was physically, she had no problems. There was no bad physical health, but she was everything that had been tried didn't work. And so they they supported the suicide of this lady. And I'm sorry, I don't go for that. If you're talking about somebody who's got maladies, physical maladies that are absolutely beyond over the constant pain. When I was a kid, we had one of my best friends had a father, he was a police officer. And he went into for surgery, and they disconnected his nerve. Whatever, they did something with his nervous system, and he was consigned to a life of pain. He got millions of dollars in a settlement, but every day he woke up in pain. There was no getting him out of that pain. Okay, and he accidentally overdosed on his pain medication because nothing was working. And he died accident. He had millions of dollars to spend, and he never got to spend them because he wanted to go to Las Vegas and the women and everything. But he never really got to do that because he died. He was in so much pain. So when you're talking about somebody who's really in physical pain that cannot be whatever, I'm okay. I don't know. But not a person who's otherwise healthy, because in terms of therapy, maybe you just didn't try this. Maybe there's something else we could look at that you hadn't considered. Because I believe that where there's a will, there may always be a way. So I don't sign on to the terminus aspect of mental illness. And that's how we started this conversation. I mean, it's not always, I don't believe we have to look at it as an always thing, even though chronic schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, I mean, these are really challenging syndromes, and a lot of folks do have to deal with it all of their life in one form or another.
Thought pathologies.
Sorry?
Thought pathologies.
Yeah, well, schizophrenia is a thought pathology, right? Right. Bipolar is more of a mood pathology, but they intertwine. They have components that can dovetail with each other. It's not always easy to make a diagnosis. The best thing is over time and having a relationship with your patient. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden, often the diagnosis becomes clearer.
Because the interpersonal relationship?
Well, because you know what you're looking for. Like if you
They're
look
venting,
at
right? That's the service, I guess. They're venting to you, and then you struggle through those pathologies with them.
I think we have categorized symptoms, okay? They have what's called a diagnostic manual for mental disorders. It's the quote-unquote Bible of clinical work, okay? And what that lists, the accumulated knowledge of the field, if you will, has identified symptoms that are usually associated with these syndromes, okay? So then they differentiate, they parse it out. And so the field has become so specialized, if you will, in terms of what they call the nomenclature, the foundation of the field, okay? So in this big book, you could say, well, these are the symptoms that I'm seeing. There may be a cluster of symptoms, things that the client is doing. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What they report. I mean, we could pick one. Is there one that you like the borderline personality,
Yeah.
a chronic sense of emptiness, difficulty with interpersonal relationships, difficulty regulating emotions? They'd be listed. There may
Okay.
be 8 or so prominent symptoms, and they're closely associated. Does that mean that 2 of those symptoms can't be in another syndrome? No, they often are.
Hmm.
Right? So sometimes when you diagnose a client, there's a lot of dovetailing. So if you're not sure, if it's not like, oh my goodness, fits this diagnosis to a T, you may say, has traits of this disorder, maybe narcissistic personality disorder, borderline, avoidant, whatever. But you're trying to make as accurate a diagnosis as you can.
And what is that called again?
The Diagnostic Manual of Mental Disorders or something.
Okay. I would add that to my
I think
list.
it's in 5 point something version or something. When I was learning,
Right.
it was in 4 or something. But
Okay.
that's a very famous, or Diagnostic and Statistical Manual or something like that. But
Okay.
it's widely known. You look it up.
I'll look into it.
Yeah.
But how so because these things, these thought patterns, these neurotic thought patterns accumulate or come together, how would they eventually cease? Like, because I thought maybe
How will they cease?
how would they stop? Right? Because I thought maybe it's the communion, right? When you said I'm talking to my counselor and I'm getting therapeutic way of like venting to them.
Right.
And then you said eventually the symptoms would go down a
Well,
little.
it's funny because
They're lacking community.
I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can overcome. I mean, like cognitive behavioral therapy, right? So what's the bottom line? Simple way of looking at it. Thoughts are central. Dysfunctional thought. The way I think about the world, okay? And you say, well, what's the old thing? You keep doing things the same way
Albert
and you expect
Einstein.
different results or whatever.
That's
So a
crazy.
therapist using cognitive behavioral therapy will start helping them untangle these dysfunctional thought patterns. Well, this is the way, like, you get testimony from the client and you then reflect that back to the client and say, okay, so you said this, this, and this. All right. Is this serving you? Are you getting what you need by thinking this way? And again, and the other thing is that when you have emotions, often behind an emotion is what?
A thought.
A thought. Right. So emotions are often
Thought, you interpret it, emotion
Right.
expressed, and then maybe action.
Yes,
Right.
all true. Absolutely. But the most important thing you look for is in cognitive behavior is what's this guy thinking of? Where'd you get that idea? When you sit there and listen and you help them unravel that. And if it takes, and they practice new ways of thinking, then a lot of these depressions or this discomfort about how I'm navigating through life will work. You'll be working through that. Right. So, but that's not the chronic mental illnesses. That's a little different. Okay. If somebody hears voices, has symptoms of schizophrenia or whatever,
Yeah.
I don't care what anybody tells you. That's still a mystery. We don't know. We don't know really what the origin of that is and how to treat it other than by masking symptoms because we throw
Right.
medication. I've thrown
Right.
many medications at people over the years. And I regret in retrospect when I found out about a lot of the side effects of the medications that I was handing out. Of course, I'm not a medical person, so I didn't prescribe them, but I was an agent. I had to put the charts in and when they take them and make sure that they took them on time and whatever. And I could remember, Zyprexa would be one. That's an antipsychotic medication.
Mm.
And the typical, it's almost like the minimum weight gain is 10 pounds.
Oh,
So
wow.
you try to, increase the exercise activity. They drink a lot of water, whatever. You try to encourage people to do that. But a lot of our clients were sedentary and they weren't going to exercise. They didn't go to the gym. So the standard
Right.
weight gain was at least minimum 10 pounds, but more likely 40 to 60 pounds.
Wow.
So now you're adding to the burden of life that they already experienced. You're adding this crap. And I was part of that. We had another medication. I forget the name of it, but it had a tendency for young boys to develop the breasts,
Right.
or young men or whatever.
Mhm.
I forget which one it was, but It's on the tip of my tongue. But I found out about that later, and I thought, my goodness, it's like, yes, it's a low percent. Yes,
The
it's
prescription.
it's yeah, prescription med, but it's not. It's not like everybody does. No, not everybody. But the fact is, these kids are still at risk, and they already hate themselves in many cases. And here, take this, and the chances are you're going to have breasts. It's like, thanks a lot,
Right.
you know.
The
So
self-image.
medications, what they do, ideally, if a medication works, it only allows the person maybe to spend more time on the same plane you're on so that we could communicate better. You know what I'm saying? It just masks symptoms. It doesn't cure anything though.
Mm.
And I don't know how schizophrenia is cured. I don't know. I don't think it is, frankly.
I think that's
I
a
don't think it cures.
conspiracy of spirituality. Because where do thoughts come from? And then, of course, the scientific platform, they'll say, "Oh, it's like it's a combustion of like what phosphorus and
I have no idea. I couldn't even venture to whatever. But I mean, but I will say that often the themes, when you look at the content of the thoughts, a lot of it is demonic, satanic, whatever. And I don't know, like, do a lot of schizophrenics self-medicate and take drugs? Or like, do we have the cart before the horse? Is there causality? They take the drugs and then all of a sudden that's the gateway into that type of thought pattern that we often find
strengthens the pathology.
Well,
The
it could be there's something already there and you're amplifying it because you took drugs, or you're just trying to quiet the symptoms and you take drugs to self-medicate. I don't know what that dance is all about. I really don't. And I don't know if anybody does, to be honest with you. I really don't know. I mean, I've never personally taken drugs of any kind. I have never been on a trip and I've never been high. I mean, I have enjoyed a few. I'm a life of the party with alcohol, but I'd better stop after 2 drinks.
Yeah.
And that's it. Because I could, and hard liquor, when the few times I've taken hard liquor, there was something in my brain that I don't like. I don't know what it is. But wine, you want to invite me to your wine. It's a party if I take wine.
Yeah, because alcohol is called spirits.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Sometimes, and you take one guy will take it and he's a rager.
Right.
He's angry at everything.
Right.
And then some of them, like, I don't know, someone will start crying.
Right.
Who knows?
Right. No, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
But that's what I'm saying in general, where are thoughts coming from? And then it's spirits, maybe. You could say the spirit of rage, right? Then it's like, oh, bipolar, I don't know. I'm not a medical professional.
It's just that our Creator gave us this capacity. We make cognitions, and we can engage in purposeful behavior, and we can talk to each other. We can relate to each other. No other species can do that. I always look at my beautiful golden retriever, and he's looking in my eyes, and it's like, it's love. It's love, I tell you, it's love. But who the heck knows what it is,
Right.
It's another species. I mean, I would love, look, you know what? When I think about it, and where's your camera? I'll look right into your camera. If I could have my way, I'd rather talk to all the lovely dogs I've had in my life than a lot of humans that I've met.
Yeah.
I mean, but wishing ain't making it so. You know what I'm saying? Animals are animals, but we have been endowed by our Creator with something extra special.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it to other people to define what that is, but or where it comes from, or how to explain it, if you will.
But definitely, with stepping forward with allegedly these pathologies are coming, it's speaking about it.
Oh yeah.
Right. And then the community or the communion with, whether it be your, oh my goodness, a psychologist or a
How
licensed
about we start with
counselor.
each other? How about we start before we start pushing the
Of course, it
button?
could be your friends or
And,
family.
but
You
also,
know,
but be open to having friends and relationships and try to learn how to communicate with each other better. A lot of people, they don't talk to each other. So tensions rise, conflicts rise, and then all of a sudden we do reactive behavior,
getting spiteful.
and then we're depressed. You know, I mean, it's like a train of dysfunction. Get off the train of dysfunction if you can, okay? Parents, spend time with your kids, okay? Uh, there's no way around it. You know, your kids are not going to do things that you're going to like all the time. And there's no excuse. If you had kids, and that means you signed up to spending time with them. And the fact that you have 2 jobs to support yourself and your family, it's not an excuse. It's an invitation. You know, what does the bank say? The bank always says, you got to pay yourself first, right?
Yeah,
So that means when you get your paycheck, you automatically take something off the top. And that will get you into a mindset of learning to live with what remains. Okay? It's the same way in other spheres of life. Okay? When you sign on to certain things, whether you're a student, an athlete, a parent, you need to do a little bit of research about what that entails before you get into that. Because you have to make the proper investment in whatever you do in life, job, school, family, whatever. And maybe we'll see a lot less kids struggling with mental problems if we spend more time working out the smaller problems as they arise. And, but again, that's simplistic. And there's
Right.
so many stressors that come at people. There's so much, I get it. But if you start with the basics, you know, maybe that would be helpful. I mean, you have no idea how many parents I met over the years. They come in the door and the kid, if you listen to the client talk about the parents, they're just animals. They're monsters. But then you meet these parents and you think, really? You know? Or there are parents who are probably worse. You know, one size doesn't fit all. But
Oh, like covert.
it could be. Oh, yeah. Well, that's sure. Why not? You got a lot of covert stuff going on in families. Why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But the thing is that why have families if you're not going to invest fully in them?
Right.
I mean, that's one thing I would start. And I'm not accusing anybody. I'm just saying,
No, they just want
stay
to have
with
fun.
work with the basics. You know,
Yeah.
work with the basics.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Alright.
What else you got?
I don't know.
I mean, I don't think we've and having talked to you, and it's been a pleasure. I don't think we covered even 0.5% of what could be covered in terms of talking about mental illness. I mean, it's living, you know. And again,
Right.
think about that term, mental illness. So there's some standard that is not mental illness, right?
Right.
Some standard of whatever. So it's what people who are just getting about their lives. Oh, what was that? Yeah, that perfect time to throw this at you. This whole quote from Henry David Thoreau, right? Walden, the famous book we all touched on in high school. Most men live lives of quiet desperation,
Oh.
right? So,
When I hear that, I just think they're not speaking up.
well, maybe
Yeah.
they know better not to speak up because there's consequences for speaking up. So they put their head down at their job or in their family situations or whatever because they know that to speak up is going to just be a tremendous amount of controversy directed back towards them. So they just, you know, like they're not going to get the raise. You know, I think I shared with you
So
about
they're just shy. Or
they're actually
self-conscious.
they're giving into the reality that they perceive, which is just go about your lives and just cope with it, okay? Because there's so much negative out there. There's so much negative. So they just put their head down and they just get through life. Like I think I shared with you, my own father, you know, whenever he said anything at his job with the phone company, he got shot down. But he had a wife and kids to support. And he had to just keep showing up for work and doing what he had to do because there were consequences if he opened his mouth. So that's what I'm trying to say. Quiet desperation. Now, the question is, are they mentally ill? Not really. Not
Okay.
really.
it reminds me a lot of the forget his name, but reminds me of the baby dad.
The baby daddy. Oh, the baby. Yeah, the baby
Yeah, yeah,
daddy's a
yeah.
perfect example of that.
Right, head down and just
Head
like
down and
yes,
just
yes,
plow.
sir, yes,
He has
ma'am.
no skills. He has no talents, whatever. But he has a job,
Right.
and he's got mouths to feed, and he knows that. So is the standard of me saying, "Why isn't this machine working? Why? Don't hurt me, please." That's what his reaction, and I understand it fully. I understand it. He can't risk it.
Right, I hear that.
Whereas a guy who's not married, not attached, I don't care, I'll get a job anyway, I don't care. And, then you can, whatever. But so who's better? Is that guy better or the guy who you could, no, aren't we wasting our time even
that's a
trying to make a
philosophical
comparison?
question,
Well,
right?
maybe, yeah, right. But that is what I'm trying to say. That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
So just people need to speak more.
Do people need to speak more? If you can.
I mean, unless they got jobs on the line for
Well, there's so many
children.
things that are on the line. Relationships could be on the line.
Yeah.
Like like the neighbor. A perfect example. The neighbors, right? The moment you say, this is how polarized we are. Okay, you're on the left, you're on the right. Very few people are in the middle, or they're invisible. So you have a neighbor. You open your mouth and say the wrong thing about the political actor, whether he be a conservative or a liberal, whatever, and then all of a sudden you get a reaction, and it's World War III. You can't even have a dialogue with somebody that you disagree with politically anymore.
There's no open-mindedness.
There's no open-mindedness. And I think I mentioned to you that I do enjoy working on the elections. And the reason why I like to work on I know what you're voting for because you have your sample ballot. Okay, and I have intense political views. I'm proud of my views, and I stand by my views. But the most important thing for me is I don't care what color your sample ballot is. You're my neighbor, and that's why I'm here.
Right.
That's an important American value that we get to vote. Okay. And yeah, you got to clean up elections. That's true. But the reality is we come to the center of town, which could be our local elementary school or whatever polling place. And for that one day, we come together and you're just my neighbor and you're voting. So it doesn't matter what your color is. Like I said, the color of your card. And like I said, I know who you are because you're walking around with your card. So I could go, oh, you're not one of me. You're not with me. That's verboten, of course. You're not allowed to do that, but I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. And I dare any person I've encountered, I give you a beautiful neighborly greeting. We might talk about the weather or sport, whatever in our brief encounter, okay? And I give you a fantastic experience. I don't need to do it. I'll continue to do it as long as it's fun. But that's why I'm doing it. I want to relate to you neighbor to neighbor. So all this other crap is superfluous. It doesn't mean anything. In the long run, well, it does mean something, but in the long run, we still should come back as neighbors. That's how I feel.
I'm sensing a overarching aspect of community is the way to amend a lot of problems.
Well, yes. Wouldn't that be nice if we had a community? But
Right.
in many ways, we don't. Our streets are empty. Kids don't play on the streets. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. My goodness, you wouldn't be shocked. Well, you can see it on old videos. Stoops, that's a stairway leading to the house, teeming with people.
Right.
You couldn't walk up and down your block without your neighbors noticing you. You had said hello, hello, Mrs. So-and-so.
Right.
Or your mother would slap you in the face if she felt that you were rude to Mrs. So-and-so. And they watched out for you.
That's
And
even 90s,
Was it? Well, I moved here in the mid '80s, and they passed an ordinance in Fairfax City where you couldn't have meetings with groups larger than X number. So this father who had organized a hockey game on the street, he got a summons,
It's ridiculous.
and then it got to the newspapers, and the city council, pulled it back.
Yeah.
But most kids in this area are transported in the used to be the Volvos, but they're transported in the cars from their swimming thing to their whatever, but they don't hang out on the streets, and we don't really have a sense of community. I don't
Yeah.
feel it, and
No.
I'm open to it. I want it,
No
but I
one
don't
knocks on
feel it.
doors.
I'm sorry.
No one knocks on doors.
No one dare not,
you
and for
know?
good reason.
You used to ride your bike to your friend's
But
house, knock on the
right,
door.
but you see how that dovetails or that links into things that are happening all over that you can see in the newspapers, the crime, the fact that you walk down the city of my birth, Brooklyn, New York. I could walk down the street and somebody might hit me over the head with some. What did they hit them with? They hit them with something, a bottle. I don't know what they hit. They were doing it, and it was all captured. A famous actor was walking out of his apartment building, and he was caught on camera. The guy from Ghostbusters.
Wow.
He got hit, or he got cold cocked, or whatever. It's like the knockout game, and then you get thrown off the subway platform. And it's like, are you kidding me? Do you think I'm going to leave suburbia where nobody talks to anybody, but at least I'm safe? You think I'm going to go back to Brooklyn and experience something like that? No. Right. So the sense of community is something that if we ever want to turn things around, we better work on that. You know, they have America's Night Out. Have you heard about that? Some foundation, you can go to the, somebody hosts it, and you can get a free hot dog. Get a free hot dog. You get a soda, and you get an ice cream sandwich, right?
All right.
And most people stand around. This is America's Night Out. It's famous around the country. Okay, I don't know who's underwriting
I've
it.
never heard of it.
They have it at the Craftsman Auto down here on whatever. But I go for the free hot dog, whatever, and I'm standing there and I'm ready for conversation. And you know what? Most people just they talk to them, to whoever they came with.
Oh yeah.
And they don't mingle. They don't, hey, how you doing? How you doing? Even the cops, they're standing there and they were told, okay, you go there. And they stand there and like they can't wait to get back to the station house or whatever. They did their mandatory time. That's just what you're trying to fight.
Yeah.
And yet nothing good comes of it.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
You're tired, aren't you? I'm just getting started. No, whatever you want.
No, it's a lot, and it's just a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah.
I feel sorry for you. I really do, because I'm happy to have lived in the 20th century. I thought it was the worst. I mean, I really thought, because we were immersed in the Holocaust and World War II and Vietnam and the civil rights. And we always thought everything was going to be on the ascendancy. Every generation was going to have an easier time of it. And meanwhile, what we've seen, like in the past year, there was a couple of weeks that it was touch and go where Russia, Ukraine, all that stuff was going to start World War III. And everyone was scared. You remember, we were kind of scared that something is going not so good. We didn't think that we were going to go back there. We had good relations with Russia for a lot of years. Since the decline of the Soviet Union, with Reagan and Gorbachev kissing each other and all this other stuff. And we thought, well, that's out of the way. And we would just have to be economic rivals with China. And we're seeing that that's not so good either. So you guys are having a hard time. There has to be something for you guys, because we had it. We felt good about our country other than the Vietnam War and the civil rights issues. But the point is, we always felt that if we could make the right argument, we could persuade other people and we could move forward. Mm. And I don't know that that's where we're at here. No. I don't know that it is.
There's a lot of not only ignorance, but arrogance.
Yes,
they hear one thing they don't like.
Yes.
And
yes.
They just retaliate. Or
that's a symptom of polarization. We're very polarized. We're not open to hearing the views of the other person. You put a lefty here, make your case. I'd sit in the chair, make your case. But what happens is, in many cases, if I then respond with something that's factual, whatever, I notice that the emotional level on the other side is rising. It happens in my own family.
Cognitive dissonance, right?
Well, it's not cognitive dissonance. It's intolerance. It's like, why can't we just agree to disagree? Mm-hmm. I've had my own brother get up and storm out of the chair. and call me every word. And we're just talking about politics. Why are you getting so emotional about this?
Right.
Call me every word every name in the book. I'm not coming back here. I'm thinking, you're like a 6-year-old, Make sure you take the pizza with you, because I don't, whatever. Take your stuff. Don't leave it behind if you have to go. But you just have to sit back and say, "Oh my goodness, wow," and try not to let it affect you, because then your emotional temperature goes up, and then your sense of wellness can be challenged as well. Then all of a sudden you're down the slippery slope. And I don't say you're going to have a mental illness, but it's not going to be pleasant. So, just try to be open-minded. I'd say all the people,
Yeah.
just try to listen to what the other guy has to say.
That's why I'm trying to bring this to the surface, because I feel
Yeah.
like in today's time it's taboo. But if it's not taboo, then it's like, oh, then you need to buy a counselor. You need to buy a psychiatrist,
Right.
right? And then that's a lot of money, and then it's insurance, and then it's this and it's that. And no, I can't. And
Right.
then
And that's interesting that you say that, because as part of our training, we also were encouraged to go through counseling ourselves. And I did it twice. And I will tell you, the first time I did it, I was like, I'm not going to name any names in terms of the agency. No, forget that. But the first time I did it, I could not believe this person was such an uncaring, cold, and vicious. She was
your
terrible.
coworker?
The counselor that I was seeing.
And is she technically a coworker?
No, she wasn't a coworker. You had to go
Completely
outside
different entity.
completely outside the agency
Okay.
that I worked at.
Huh.
She was horrible. And I just wanted to say, you don't belong in this business, whatever. But then I did it again. And she was very sweet and very helpful.
And it was the same woman.
No, somebody else.
Okay.
Somebody else. But so sometimes, what are you buying also? And,
Right.
if you go into therapy, you say you get what you pay for, whatever. I don't know. You need to be, it's just like in physical training, in your thing. You want to sit there and get on your phone or be otherwise occupied or just gossip with your trainer or whatever. You get what you pay for, Sorry. You're going to get nothing out of it.
Damn.
But,
I hate trainers that do that.
What's that?
I hate trainers that do that.
They do it. They do it all the time.
Yeah, like we spoke, and I witnessed that.
You witness it. I've witnessed it.
Exactly. You do too.
Right. But therapists can also be like that too. They just
a one and done.
They're just not. They
shuffling.
were. What it was they were pursuing the degree. The degree was everything, but the work, the content of the work, not so much. I've worked with many people like that. You just have to say, why is this person in the business? I had a guy who was a therapist who spent his time back in 2008, with chronically mentally ill clients. I don't call them patients. They're clients to me. Mm-hmm. He was doing you got to vote for Obama in all of his groups.
Oh, he's like marketing.
He wanted you to vote. That was a big thing. You're not American. You're un-American if you don't vote for. I couldn't believe it. I'm like overhearing this and I'm thinking, doesn't anybody want to put the hammer down on this clown? He was a political activist, and he was doing counseling groups with chronically mentally ill patients, most of which don't even vote anyway.
And persuading them to vote for Obama.
Yes, it's your duty to vote for Obama. It's a little crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
One time I was on a walk with the clients. We did a recreational walk, and all of a sudden, out of the sky, the United States of America, this gigantic helicopter, touched down. This was behind a hotel. So what was happening? I put two and two together. They were doing a dry run on President Clinton, the Secret Service, the security. They were going the route of where the president would be, because there was a road that in the back that would lead to the hotel. So I'm there with this whole group home full of clients and me and my coworker. And we're like, it's the president of the United States, the president of the United States. And I turned and looked at my clients. Not one of them gave a damn about the fact that the Secret Service, the guy comes out of the helicopter and he says, go about your business, sir. I said, yes, sir, we will. But my point is that the clients had no interest whatsoever because they're in their own
Right.
world, you know.
Right.
They weren't connected. Now some are, but most of them, they live in their own little world, and that's, you want to try to help them expand their world, which is one of the reasons why we try to help them develop a social network. That was an important part of what we did, because you can't live in isolation.
Right.
You know, man's a social animal. That's the first thing you'll see in any textbook on any social sciences. Man is a social animal. Indeed, we
Right.
are. But a lot of my clients, the chronically mentally ill, they weren't. They were cut off. They lived in their own little world, and it's a terribly painful place to be, I would think. But like I said, in this particular instance, they had no interest. So to take it back to this guy who was doing Obama rally in a mental health group, it's like you just want to say to him, what is wrong with you? Not only that it's unethical for you to do this, but what is wrong with you mentally that you would even think?
Right.
So that's my story. Go ahead.
Right.
Anything else?
No,
Let me
I don't
sleep.
think
I love
so.
it.
I think the solution is speaking and, finding a network, finding a family.
Absolutely.
Right.
Develop a network of healthy people.
Healthy people. Yeah, that's hard to discern sometimes. If you already, as a person, are struggling with those ailments, then how, what is right? What is good?
Right. And you can't really be much, if you're in a dysfunction of substance use or whatever, I don't know how much you can be helpful to someone who's trying to kick it. You know, I don't, people, places, and things. I don't think people, like, for example, who are trying to recover from substance use or whatever. No, I'm sorry. I don't think they should be around people who are actively using.
Right.
No, I don't think so. And I have been to many 12-step groups, open meetings only, obviously. And there are things you could criticize them. A lot of people do, but on balance, I think they are a very welcoming, warm, healthy place to be. Okay? When done right, 12-step group has helped millions and millions of people. They're caring, and they are non-judgmental. And like I said, you have people who, there's certain terminology of people who just, they turn it into a cult that's not very functional. But you walk around them. You let them be who they are, but then you go and find healthy people. Yeah, that's another day. Substance abuse stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to talk to you about my experience with that as well sometime.
Yeah. Honestly, I think that would be.
And it's interface also with mental illness as well.
Exactly. That's a nugget within it.
Oh yeah, definitely. So anyway.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. I thank you.
My pleasure.
It,
I didn't know I would get into this stuff because I'm moving on.
Someone needs to speak about it.
You what now?
Someone needs to speak about it. Like I said earlier, just with it being taboo, then that's how you dig a deeper hole.
Oh, you make it worse. Yeah.
No, and you're already talking about with society.
No. And I would say the good thing is that it is
a cultural problem.
Okay, but it is less taboo today. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But the only contribution that I think I can make is that I think people should start focusing on that social bubble and its interface with mental illness. That part of the biopsychosocial model of mental illness etiology or development. Yes, family. Yes, your personal, what you are as a unit, let's say, but also the contribution of these horrible issues that we're seeing out in the public and how they contribute to the decline in the wellness of the average person. That's if I'm making any contribution, I hope it would be that. Because a lot of the other stuff is commonly known, but we kind of we're not placing as much emphasis on what children, young people, impressionable people, even especially college students as well, how they're having to experience their world in many dysfunctional ways that perhaps my generation didn't have to deal with.
See.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great.
Thank you.
You got it.